My name is Iris, and I thought baby showers were just awkward for someone struggling with infertility. Then my husband dragged me out of one, whispering, "We have to go," like the house was on fire. What he'd overheard in the bathroom changed everything. The pregnant woman wasn't pregnant. The daughter wasn't the daughter. And the sweet old lady throwing the party was about to lose everything to someone who'd been dead for 3 years. But the real shock, why it was happening, will break your heart. I smoothed my yellow sundress one last time before knocking on Mrs. Crenshaw's door. The April afternoon sun felt warm against my back as I balanced the gift bag in one hand and adjusted the bow in my dark hair with the other. Jasper stood beside me, fidgeting with his watch, a nervous habit I'd grown to recognize over our 3 years of marriage. Mrs. Crenshaw had been our landlord for 2 years now, ever since we'd moved into the little duplex on Maple Street. She was 62, widowed, and had surprised everyone last Christmas when she announced she was expecting her first grandchild. Her daughter Melody lived across the country in Oregon, and Mrs. Crenshaw had been over the moon about the whole thing. "You sure this gift is okay?" I whispered to Jasper as we heard footsteps approaching the door. "Relax, Iris. It's perfect," he said, but his voice carried that same tension I'd noticed all morning. He'd been quiet during breakfast, distracted while we wrapped the present, and kept checking his phone in the car. The door swung open, revealing Mrs. Crenshaw in a floral dress, her silver hair perfectly curled. Pink and blue balloons bobbed behind her like cheerful soldiers, and the sound of laughter drifted from inside her living room. "Oh, my dear tenants, come in, come in," she beamed, ushering us into her home transformed with baby shower magic. Pastel streamers hung from the ceiling in gentle swoops, and a table groaned under the weight of gifts wrapped in nursery themes, tiny elephants, smiling suns, and sleeping moons. I recognized most of the faces scattered around the living room. There was Mrs. Patterson from next door, always eager for neighborhood gossip. The ladies from Mrs. Crenshaw's book club sat together on the sofa, their reading glasses hanging from colorful chains. A few relatives I'd seen at Christmas gatherings had driven in from nearby towns, all chattering excitedly about babies and due dates. The guest of honor, Melody, sat in the center of it all, like a queen on her throne. Her hands rested on her very pregnant belly, and she had her mother's kind eyes and warm smile. I'd only met her once before, when she'd flown in last month to help plan the shower, but she seemed sweet enough. "This is so beautiful," I told Mrs. Crenshaw, meaning every word. The house felt alive with joy and anticipation. Even the afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed brighter somehow. Jasper squeezed my hand, but when I looked at him, his smile seemed forced. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, despite the comfortable temperature inside. We found seats on the floral couch as the gift opening ceremony began. I watched Melody unwrap tiny clothes that could fit in my palm, soft blankets in rainbow colors, and wooden toys that looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. Each present brought squeals of delight from the crowd, and I found myself clapping along with genuine happiness. But underneath my smile, I felt that familiar pang in my chest. Jasper and I had been trying for a baby for over a year now. Each negative pregnancy test felt like a small death. Each baby shower invitation, a beautiful kind of torture. I wanted to be happy for other people. I really did. But sometimes it hurt more than I expected. "Isn't this precious?" Mrs. Patterson held up a set of onesies with little elephants marching across the front. I nodded and clapped, pushing down the ache in my throat. Beside me, Jasper's leg bounced nervously, his knee hitting mine over and over like a woodpecker against a tree. "You okay?" I whispered, leaning closer to him. He nodded too quickly, the way people do when they're definitely not okay. "Fine, just fine." But he wasn't fine. I could tell by the way he kept glancing toward the front door like he wanted to escape. I could see it in how his jaw clenched when someone mentioned how blessed Melody was, and in the way his hand trembled slightly when he reached for his water glass. The party games began with the enthusiasm of a school carnival. We guessed baby food flavors that all tasted like mushy vegetables, measured Melody's belly with yarn like she was a prize pumpkin, and shared parenting advice that ranged from helpful to hilarious. I threw myself into the festivities, determined to enjoy this celebration despite my own heartache. Mrs. Crenshaw deserved our full attention and happiness. That's when I noticed Jasper checking his phone again. He pulled it from his pocket with shaking fingers, and as he read whatever message had appeared on the screen, his face went pale as notebook paper. He stood up so suddenly that his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Every conversation in the room stopped. Every head turned toward us. Even the pink balloons seemed to pause their gentle swing. "We have to go," he announced to the silent room, his voice tight with something that sounded like panic. I stared at my husband, feeling heat rush to my cheeks. What on earth was he doing? "What?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. The entire room had gone dead quiet. All eyes were on us like we were actors who had forgotten our lines in the middle of a play. Mrs. Crenshaw's face fell from joy to concern in the space of a heartbeat. I could see Melody looking confused in her chair, surrounded by half-opened gifts and crumpled wrapping paper. The pink balloons that had seemed so cheerful moments before now felt like they were mocking us. "I'm sorry," Jasper said, his voice tight as a guitar string about to snap. "There's been an emergency. We really need to leave." My cheeks burned with embarrassment that felt like standing too close to a campfire. We'd only been here 45 minutes, and now my husband was making a scene at our landlord's family celebration. Mrs. Crenshaw had been nothing but kind to us. She'd even helped us move our heavy couch when the delivery guys couldn't make it up the narrow stairs. "Is everything all right, dear?" Mrs. Crenshaw asked, her voice full of worry. The concern in her eyes made me feel even worse. "Yes. It's just," Jasper looked at me with desperate eyes, like a drowning man reaching for a life preserver. "Family emergency." I wanted to sink into the floral cushions and disappear forever. My own family lived 3 hours away in Columbus, and his parents were somewhere in the middle of the ocean on a cruise ship. What emergency could there possibly be? Of course, Mrs. Crenshaw said, graciously, though I could hear the disappointment underneath her polite words. "Family comes first. I hope everything works out." I stood up mechanically, my legs feeling like they were made of rubber bands. Around the room, faces stared at us with mixtures of curiosity and sympathy. Mrs. Patterson looked like she was already planning how to spread this story around the neighborhood. "I'm so sorry," I managed to say to Melody, my voice shaking. "The shower is beautiful. Congratulations again." She smiled with understanding, but I could see the questions dancing in her eyes. Everyone was wondering what kind of emergency would make us flee a baby shower like our hair was on fire. Jasper practically dragged me toward the front door, his hand gripping my elbow so tightly it would probably leave marks. I grabbed our contribution to the potluck table as we passed, a plate of homemade lemon bars that I'd spent all morning perfecting. It felt ridiculous carrying dessert during what was supposed to be a crisis. "Call if you need anything," Mrs. Crenshaw called after us, her voice echoing in the sudden quiet we left behind. The moment we stepped outside into the April sunshine, I yanked my arm free from Jasper's grip hard enough to make him stumble. "What is wrong with you?" I hissed, keeping my voice low since Mrs. Crenshaw's windows were wide open. That was completely humiliating. Mrs. Crenshaw will never look at us the same way again. "Get in the car," he said, his face the color of old newspaper. "No! Not until you tell me what's going on." "What emergency, Jasper? What did you see on your phone that made you lose your mind?" He ran both hands through his sandy hair, a gesture that usually meant he was trying to figure out how to tell me something I wouldn't want to hear. Like the time he'd accidentally deleted all our wedding photos from his laptop, or when he'd forgotten to pay the electric bill and our power got shut off during a heat wave. "Please, Iris, just trust me. We need to go home. Right now." The desperation in his voice stopped my anger cold, like someone had thrown ice water on a fire. In 3 years of marriage, I'd never seen him look this scared. Not when we'd gotten the late-night call about his grandfather's heart attack. Not when I'd had that terrible flu last winter and couldn't keep anything down for a week. Not even when his boss had threatened to fire him over that missed deadline. "Are you sick?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice like cold fingers around my heart. "Did you get test results back from the doctor? Is it cancer?" "No, it's not. I'm not sick." He unlocked our car with hands that shook like autumn leaves. "Please, honey. I'll explain everything once we get home. I promise." I looked back at Mrs. Crenshaw's house, where I could see people through the living room window, returning to their celebration like nothing had happened. The pink balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze, and somewhere inside, laughter was starting up again. We'd left a hole in their happiness, but life was already filling it back in. Against every instinct telling me to demand answers right here on the sidewalk, I got in the car. The drive home was pure torture. Jasper gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles looked like white marbles, and he kept checking the rearview mirror like we were being chased by invisible monsters. I studied his profile, searching for clues in the familiar landscape of his face. A muscle in his jaw twitched like a trapped insect, and that vein in his temple that only appeared when he was really stressed stood out like a blue river against his pale skin. "Just tell me no one died," I said finally, breaking the heavy silence. No one died. Are we in some kind of trouble? Money trouble? Legal trouble? Not exactly. What does that mean? Not exactly? He pulled into our driveway and sat for a moment without turning off the engine. Our little half of the duplex looked exactly the same as always. White shutters, red door, the herb garden I'd planted by the front steps. Mrs. Crenshaw's half sat quiet and empty, since she was obviously still hosting her shower just 2 streets away. "Jasper, you're really scaring me now." He finally turned off the car and looked at me with eyes full of an emotion I couldn't identify. Guilt? Fear? Something else entirely that I'd never seen before? "I know this looks crazy," he said softly. "I know I embarrassed you back there. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Iris. But I had to get you out of that house." "Why?" "Because..." He closed his eyes and took a shaky breath that seemed to come from his toes. "Because of what I heard when I went to use the bathroom." My stomach dropped like a stone thrown into a deep well. "What did you hear?" "I wasn't trying to listen in on anyone," Jasper said as we sat on our living room couch 10 minutes later. The lemon bars sat forgotten on the coffee table between us, and I could still hear faint sounds of celebration drifting from Mrs. Crenshaw's house 2 streets over. "You know how thin the walls are in these old houses." I nodded, remembering how we could sometimes hear Mrs. Crenshaw's television through our shared wall, or the sound of her vacuum cleaner on Saturday mornings when she cleaned. I went upstairs to use the bathroom because there was a line for the one downstairs. "You remember Mrs. Patterson and those other ladies were all waiting." He paused to take a sip of water, but his hand shook so badly that some spilled onto his shirt. "When I was washing my hands, I heard voices from Mrs. Crenshaw's bedroom next door." "Voices?" At first I wasn't paying attention. Just normal conversation, you know. But then I heard Melody crying. My heart squeezed tight in my chest. Crying? Is something wrong with the baby? That's exactly what I thought too. I almost knocked on the bedroom door to see if she needed help or if we should call a doctor. Jasper's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass again. But then I heard what she was actually saying. The afternoon sun slanted through our living room windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor that seemed to reach toward us like dark fingers. I could hear the distant sound of laughter from Mrs. Crenshaw's house, the baby shower continuing without us like nothing had happened. "She was on the phone," Jasper continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "with someone named Derek, and she was saying..." He stopped, swallowing hard, like the words were stuck in his throat. "Saying what, Jasper?" She was saying that she couldn't keep pretending much longer, that the whole family gathering was making her sick with guilt, that she wished she'd never agreed to this plan. A chill ran down my spine like ice water, despite the warm spring day. What plan? I don't know, but then Derek, whoever he is, must have said something on the other end, because Melody got really upset. Her voice got louder, and she said, "I know we need the money, but this feels wrong. These people love her. They're throwing her a baby shower. She's so excited about being a grandmother." I felt like I was trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and the picture on the box covered up. Being a grandmother? But Mrs. Crenshaw is about to be a grandmother. Melody's pregnant with her first baby. Jasper shook his head slowly, like he was moving through thick mud. "That's just it, Iris. What if she's not?" The words hung in the air between us like a poisonous cloud. I stared at my husband, trying to process what he was suggesting. It felt like he was speaking a foreign language that I almost understood, but not quite. "That's impossible," I said finally. "I've seen her, Jasper. She's obviously pregnant." We've watched her belly grow over the past few months since she moved here to prepare for the birth. She's due in 3 weeks. Have we, though, really watched it grow? Jasper leaned forward, his voice urgent like he was trying to convince me the sky was falling. Think about it carefully. When did we first actually meet her face to face? Last month when she flew in to help plan the shower. Before that, we only heard about her from Mrs. Crenshaw. Phone calls, letters, emails, but no visits. I tried to remember, digging through my memory like searching through old photo albums. Mrs. Crenshaw had talked about Melody constantly for months and months. Her daughter, who lived way out in Oregon, who'd gotten married 2 years ago to a nice man, who'd surprised her mother with the wonderful pregnancy news at Christmas time. But Jasper was right. We'd never actually seen Melody until recently. Even if that's true, I said, I've seen her with my own eyes, Jasper. She's pregnant. You can't fake something like that. Can't you? His voice was barely a whisper, like he was afraid someone might overhear us. What if it's all fake? The belly, the pregnancy, everything? The possibility hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I'd heard of fake pregnancy scams before. Women who would pretend to be expecting and then disappear with money or gifts from well-meaning people who wanted to help. But this was different. This was family. This was a daughter and her mother. Why would she do that to her own mother? I don't know. But I heard her mention money, remember. She told Derek that they needed the money. I stood up and paced to the window, looking across our small yard at Mrs. Crenshaw's house. Through her living room window, I could see people still gathered around Melody, still celebrating the coming grandchild that might not exist. The sight made me feel sick. Maybe you misunderstood, I said desperately, grasping for any explanation that would make this nightmare go away. Maybe she was talking about something else entirely. Maybe Derek is her husband and they're having money problems, and she feels guilty about her mom spending so much money on the shower. Maybe, Jasper said, but his tone made it clear he didn't believe that for a second. I turned back to face him, wrapping my arms around myself like I was trying to hold my whole world together. What else did you hear? She said something about 3 more weeks, that she just had to make it 3 more weeks, and then she could disappear. Derek told her to calm down, that everything was going according to plan. My legs felt weak as overcooked noodles. I sank back onto the couch, my mind racing like a hamster on a wheel. Mrs. Crenshaw had been so happy these past few months. She'd bought tiny baby clothes, set up a beautiful nursery in her spare room, made plans to fly to Oregon for the birth. She'd even started talking about selling the duplex so she could move closer to her grandchild. There's more, Jasper said quietly, and something in his voice told me I really didn't want to hear it. I looked at him, not sure I could handle whatever came next. Right before they hung up the phone, Derek said something about the old lady having plenty of money and that this was their ticket to a better life. And Melody said, he paused, looking like he might be sick. She said, I know, but she trusts me completely. She doesn't suspect anything. The room felt like it was spinning around me like a carnival ride gone wrong. Sweet Mrs. Crenshaw, who brought us fresh cookies when she baked extra, who never raised our rent even when property values went up all around us, who had shoveled our walkway last winter when Jasper was traveling for work. We have to tell her, I said, my voice shaking. Tell her what? That I was eavesdropping on private conversations and overheard something that might mean her daughter is running some kind of scam? With no proof except my word? I understood his problem, but I couldn't bear the thought of Mrs. Crenshaw being hurt by someone she loved and trusted. So what do we do? Jasper was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands like they held answers. When he looked up, his expression was grim as a storm cloud. We have to find proof, real proof that we can show her. Because if I'm right about this, Mrs. Crenshaw is about to lose a lot more than money. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Crenshaw's glowing face when she'd opened the door for us. The way she'd practically sparkled with grandmother pride, how she'd shown everyone the little yellow booties she'd knitted herself with her own 2 hands. Jasper was in his home office, supposedly working on his graphic design projects, but I could hear him pacing back and forth instead of typing on his keyboard. We'd barely spoken since our conversation on the couch, both of us lost in our own worried thoughts like ships in separate storms. I made chamomile tea and tried to read my book, but the words blurred together on the page like spilled ink. Every few minutes, I'd glance out the window toward Mrs. Crenshaw's side of the duplex. The baby shower had ended hours ago, but lights were still on in several rooms. I imagined her and Melody sorting through all those gifts, folding tiny clothes, talking about the future that might not be real. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Emma. "How was the baby shower? Did you cry? I know those are hard for you right now." I stared at the message, not sure how to respond. How could I explain that the baby shower had turned into something much worse than my own fertility struggles? How do you tell someone that you might have stumbled onto a terrible crime? "Did you ever actually meet Melody before today?" I called to Jasper. "No," he called back from his office. "Why?" "Just wondering." I thought about all the conversations I'd had with Mrs. Crenshaw over the past few months. She'd shown me ultrasound photos. At least, photos she said were ultrasounds. She'd read me parts of letters that Melody had supposedly written about morning sickness and baby names. But now everything felt suspicious, like looking at a painting and suddenly noticing all the brushstrokes. I walked to our shared wall and pressed my ear against it, feeling silly but desperate for information. I could hear voices, Mrs. Crenshaw and Melody talking quietly. I couldn't make out actual words, just the low murmur of conversation, interrupted by occasional laughter. "Iris?" Jasper appeared in the doorway, his hair sticking up in different directions. "What are you doing?" "Trying to hear something. Anything that might help us figure this out." I stepped back from the wall, embarrassed at being caught. This is driving me crazy. What if we're wrong? What if you misunderstood what you heard? What if we're right? The question hung between us like a sword ready to drop. I knew Jasper well enough to know he wouldn't have reacted so dramatically unless he was truly convinced something was very wrong. "Show me exactly what you heard," I said finally. We went upstairs to our bathroom, which shared a wall with Mrs. Crenshaw's master bedroom. Jasper positioned himself by the sink and pointed toward the wall. "I was right here when I heard the crying," he whispered. Then the phone conversation started right after that. I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to hear anything useful. But there was nothing except the soft sound of a television playing some old movie. Whatever emotional conversation Jasper had overheard was long over. "We need more information," I said, "about Melody's life in Oregon, about her husband Derek, about her pregnancy and medical care." Jasper nodded. "Mrs. Crenshaw mentions her daughter all the time when we chat. Maybe we can ask casual questions without seeming suspicious." "Like what?" "Hey, is your daughter really pregnant or is she running an elaborate scam on you?" Despite everything, Jasper almost smiled, more subtle than that. I thought about Mrs. Crenshaw's daily habits. She got her mail around noon every day, often stopping to chat if we were outside working in the yard. She did her grocery shopping on Wednesday afternoons at the same store. She had book club every other Thursday evening at the library. "Tomorrow is Wednesday," I said. "Grocery shopping day." I could offer to drive her since her car has been making that weird noise. Make conversation about Melody during the trip. That's good. And I could do some internet research while you're gone. If Melody is really married to this Derek person, there might be public records, wedding announcements, social media accounts, that kind of thing. The plan felt thin as tissue paper. But it was something I couldn't shake the image of Mrs. Crenshaw's face when she'd talked about flying to Oregon for the birth. How she'd worried about being in the way, but was too excited to stay home. "What's Melody's last name?" I realized I'd never heard Mrs. Crenshaw mention her daughter's married name, or even Mrs. Crenshaw's first name for that matter. "I think it's Morrison," Jasper said. "I remember seeing it on a package delivery once when I signed for her. Melody Morrison." I tried to imagine searching for her online. Do we even know what city in Oregon she supposedly lives in? Portland, I think. Mrs. Crenshaw mentioned it once when she was talking about the weather differences. Portland was a huge city. Finding one potentially fake pregnant woman would be like finding a specific needle in a haystack full of needles. But we had to try. That night, sleep seemed impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mrs. Crenshaw's trusting face, then imagined her heartbreak if she discovered her daughter was lying to her. I thought about the nursery she'd set up with such care, the plane tickets she'd probably already bought, the dreams she was building around a grandchild who might not exist. Around 2 a.m, I heard a car engine starting outside our house. I slipped out of bed quietly and peered through our bedroom curtains. A dark sedan was pulling away from Mrs. Crenshaw's driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was too dark to see who was driving, but my heart began to race like I'd been running. "Jasper," I whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. He sat up immediately, all traces of sleep disappearing. "Someone just left Mrs. Crenshaw's house. In a car." He joined me at the window, but the vehicle was already turning the corner at the end of our street, its red taillights disappearing into the night like dying embers. "Melody?" he asked. "Maybe, or maybe someone else entirely." We stood there in the darkness, staring out at the quiet street. Mrs. Crenshaw's house was completely dark now, except for a single porch light that cast long shadows across her front yard. "This is really happening, isn't it?" I said softly. Jasper put his arm around my shoulders. "I think so. I really think so." The next morning, I watched from our kitchen window as Mrs. Crenshaw came outside to get her newspaper from the front steps. She moved slowly, and even from a distance, I could see that her usual cheerful energy was missing. She looked tired, older somehow, like she'd aged years overnight. When she bent down to pick up the paper, I noticed her pause and look toward the street where that mysterious car had been parked. She stood there for a long moment, as if trying to make sense of something, before heading back inside with slumped shoulders. "She knows something's wrong," I told Jasper over breakfast. "Or she's just tired from hosting the party yesterday." But I didn't think that was it. Mrs. Crenshaw had the kind of energy that usually carried her through anything. She'd once hosted a dinner party for 12 people and then stayed up all night baking cookies for a church fundraiser the next day. At 11:30, I positioned myself in our front yard, pretending to weed the herb garden while keeping one eye on Mrs. Crenshaw's front door. Right on schedule, she emerged with her purse and shopping list in hand. "Oh, hello, Iris," she called, but her usual warmth seemed forced, like she was reading lines from a script. "Hi, Mrs. Crenshaw. I was just about to head to the grocery store myself. Would you like to ride together?" I noticed your car was making that strange noise again. She hesitated, which was very unusual. Mrs. Crenshaw normally loved company and conversation during her errands. "That's very kind of you, dear, but I think I'll drive myself today." Something was definitely wrong. Very wrong. I spent the rest of Wednesday morning feeling like a detective in my own neighborhood. Every time I passed a window, I found myself glancing toward Mrs. Crenshaw's house, looking for signs of what might be happening inside. The curtains stayed closed longer than usual. No lights moved from room to room like they normally did when she was doing her morning routine. Jasper had taken his laptop to the coffee shop downtown, claiming he needed a change of scenery for work. But I knew he was really trying to research Melody Morrison without being obvious about it. We'd agreed it would look suspicious if he was clearly doing internet detective work from our home office, where Mrs. Crenshaw might see the glow of his computer screen through our shared wall. Around 2 o'clock, Mrs. Crenshaw's old blue car pulled back into the driveway. I watched her struggle with grocery bags that seemed heavier than usual, her movements lacking their typical quick energy. She dropped her keys twice trying to unlock her front door. Against my better judgment, I hurried outside. "Let me help you with those," I called, already crossing the small strip of grass between our driveways. "Oh, that's not necessary," she started to protest, but I was already taking 2 paper bags from her tired arms. Up close, I could see that her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying for hours. Her usually perfect silver hair looked messy, and there was a slight tremor in her hands as she fumbled with her house keys. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked gently as we walked toward her front door together. "Just tired, dear. The excitement of yesterday, you know." But her voice cracked on the word excitement, and I knew there was much more to it than simple fatigue. Inside her kitchen, I helped her put away groceries while trying to think of a natural way to bring up Melody. The house felt different somehow, quieter and sadder, like someone had turned down the volume on life itself. The baby shower decorations were completely gone, but I could see a few deflated pink balloons in the corner trash can. "Where's Melody today?" I asked, stacking cans of soup in her pantry. Mrs. Crenshaw's hands went completely still on a box of cereal. The silence stretched out so long, I wondered if she'd heard me. She had some errands to run in town," she said finally. The pause told me everything. I remembered the mysterious car leaving in the dark, early hours of the morning, and wondered if Melody had left for good. "It must be so nice having her here for such a long visit," I continued carefully, like I was walking across thin ice. When does she fly back to Oregon? I'm not entirely sure anymore. Mrs. Crenshaw's voice was barely above a whisper. Plans seem to be changing. I turned to face her completely, and what I saw in her expression made my heart break into pieces. This was a woman who had just had her whole world turned upside down and shaken like a snow globe. Mrs. Crenshaw, I said softly, is everything okay between you and Melody? For a moment, I thought she might tell me everything. Her eyes filled with tears that threatened to spill over, and her mouth opened as if the words were right there, desperate to come out and be heard. But then she seemed to catch herself, like someone had reminded her to keep secrets. Everything's fine, dear. Thank you so much for helping with the groceries. It was clearly a polite dismissal, but I couldn't bring myself to leave her alone when she was obviously carrying some terrible pain. You know, I said, taking a big risk, if you ever need someone to talk to about anything, I'm right next door. Sometimes it helps to have an outside perspective on complicated family situations. She looked at me with sharp attention then, and I wondered if I'd revealed too much of what we suspected. What makes you think there's a complicated family situation? My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. I just meant in general. Family relationships can be difficult sometimes, even when we love each other. We stared at each other across her sunny kitchen, and I could feel the weight of all the unspoken truths hanging in the air between us like heavy storm clouds. Iris, she said finally, her voice careful and measured, did you and Jasper really have a family emergency yesterday? The question caught me completely off guard. I'd been so focused on what she might know about Melody that I hadn't prepared for her to question our dramatic exit story. Why do you ask? Because in 40 years of hosting parties and gatherings, I've never seen anyone leave quite so dramatically. And then this morning I was thinking about it, and I realized I don't actually know much about your family situations. You never mention parents or siblings visiting, never talk about family events or holidays. She was absolutely right. Jasper and I were both from small families that lived far away, and we mostly kept to ourselves in the neighborhood. We'd been friendly with Mrs. Crenshaw, but never particularly close or personal. It was complicated, I said weakly, knowing how awful that sounded. Complicated. She repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter and unpleasant. That seems to be going around lately. The kitchen fell silent, except for the steady tick of her old wall clock. I could feel we were both dancing around our respective secrets, each afraid to be the first person to reveal what we knew. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jasper. Found something important. Come home when you can. Mrs. Crenshaw noticed me glance at my phone with obvious anxiety. More family emergency? She asked, but there was no accusation in her voice, just pure exhaustion. Mrs. Crenshaw, I said impulsively, whatever's going on with your family, you don't have to handle it all by yourself. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. Hope, maybe. Or relief at the possibility of not carrying her burden alone anymore. I think, she said slowly and carefully, I may have been a very foolish old woman. What do you mean? She walked to her kitchen table and sat down heavily in one of the wooden chairs like her legs couldn't support her weight anymore. After a moment's hesitation, I joined her at the table. Last night, after everyone went home and Melody went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I was so happy, so excited about becoming a grandmother for the first time. I kept thinking about flying to Oregon, helping with the baby, all the wonderful times that were waiting ahead of us. I nodded, encouraging her to continue talking. So I decided to look at the ultrasound pictures again. Melody had given me copies to keep as souvenirs, and I had them in a little photo album. She paused, her hands trembling slightly on the table. I wanted to study them more carefully. See if I could tell whether the baby looked more like her or her husband, Derek. My stomach clenched tight with dread. What did you find? I decided to look them up on the computer. The ultrasound images. I thought maybe I could learn to read them better, understand what all those shadows and shapes meant. Oh no! I could see exactly where this story was heading, and it was nowhere good. The first image that came up in my internet search was completely identical to one of Melody's pictures. Exactly identical, down to every little detail. Her voice broke completely. It was from a website that sells fake ultrasound images to people who want to pretend they're pregnant. The words hit the kitchen like a bomb going off. Mrs. Crenshaw buried her face in her hands. her shoulders shaking with silent sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. I stayed up all night searching and checking. Every single ultrasound picture she gave me exists somewhere online. You can buy a whole set for $20. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, not trusting myself to speak without crying too. And then this morning, she continued through her tears, I found her overnight bag sitting by the front door, packed full of clothes, like she was planning to leave without even saying goodbye to me. Did you confront her about it? I tried to, but she wasn't in her bedroom. The bed hadn't been slept in at all. Mrs. Crenshaw looked up at me with eyes full of betrayal and heartbreak. My daughter spent the night somewhere else and was planning to disappear this morning, leaving me with fake ultrasound pictures and a nursery full of clothes for a baby that doesn't exist. I felt physically sick. All of Jasper's worst suspicions had been completely correct, but seeing the devastation on Mrs. Crenshaw's face made me wish desperately that we'd been wrong about everything. Where is she now? I don't know for sure. She came back around noon, after I'd already left for grocery shopping. When I got home, there was a note on the kitchen counter saying she had to fly back to Oregon early due to unexpected complications with the pregnancy. Miss Crenshaw's laugh was bitter and painful to hear. Complications with a pregnancy that isn't even real. My phone buzzed again with another urgent text from Jasper, but I ignored it completely. I'm so sorry, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. The worst part, Mrs. Crenshaw whispered, is that I don't even understand why. Why would my own daughter do something so cruel to me? I found Jasper at our kitchen table 30 minutes later, his laptop surrounded by printed pages and sticky notes like he was solving a murder case. His hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it for hours, and there were coffee rings on papers that suggested he'd been at this research for a very long time. Tell me you found something that makes sense of all this, I said, sinking into the chair across from him. Because Mrs. Crenshaw just confirmed everything we suspected, and it's even worse than we thought. His head snapped up from his computer screen. She knows about the fake pregnancy. She figured it out on her own last night. The ultrasound pictures were bought from some website that sells fake ones to people who want to pretend they're pregnant. And Melody disappeared this morning, leaving only a note about flying back to Oregon early. Oregon. Jasper's expression grew dark as storm clouds. That's part of the problem. There is no Oregon. I stared at him, confused. What do you mean? He turned his laptop toward me, showing a screen full of search results and browser tabs. I've spent 6 hours trying to find any trace of Melody Morrison in Portland, Oregon. Marriage records, social media accounts, voter registration, property records, job listings. Absolutely nothing. It's like she doesn't exist anywhere. Maybe she uses a different last name after getting married. Or maybe she lives in a different city than Portland. I thought of that too. He shuffled through his papers, pulling out a printed page. But then I remembered something Mrs. Crenshaw mentioned a few months ago. She said that Melody worked as a dental hygienist. So I started searching professional licensing databases for the whole state. I leaned forward, studying the page he'd handed me. It was from the Oregon Board of Dentistry website, showing a list of active licenses for dental hygienists throughout the state. No Melody Morrison anywhere, Jasper continued. No Melody with Mrs. Crenshaw's maiden name, either. I found that on an old property record from when she bought this house. In fact, I couldn't find any dental hygienist named Melody in the entire state of Oregon who matched the age range Mrs. Crenshaw has mentioned. The implications hit me like a truck. So who is the woman we met yesterday? That's exactly what I've been trying to figure out. He pulled up another browser tab on his laptop. I started thinking about what she might have been using Mrs. Crenshaw's information for. Identity theft, maybe. Or some kind of long-term financial scam. Financial scam? Think about it carefully, Iris. Mrs. Crenshaw has been sending money to Oregon for months and months. Baby clothes, nursery furniture, medical expenses that insurance supposedly didn't cover. She even mentioned wanting to sell this duplex so she could move closer to her grandchild. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. How much money are we talking about? I can't know for sure without seeing her bank records. But based on things she's mentioned to us, Jasper consulted his handwritten notes. Probably several $1,000s already, with the potential for much, much more if she actually goes through with selling this property. I thought about our monthly rent checks, always promptly deposited, Never a problem with late payments or bounced checks. Mrs. Crenshaw had always seemed financially comfortable, but if someone was systematically draining her bank accounts... "There's more," Jasper said grimly. "I found something really disturbing when I started searching for scams involving fake pregnancies and elderly targets." He opened another tab, showing a news article from a television station in Michigan. The headline read, "Local woman loses life savings to fake granddaughter scam." I scanned the article quickly, my horror growing with each sentence. An elderly widow had been contacted by someone claiming to be her deceased son's girlfriend, pregnant with his child. Over the course of 8 months, the woman had sent over $40,000 for medical expenses, living costs, and baby supplies. When she finally tried to visit for the birth, she discovered the address was fake, the phone number disconnected, and her entire life savings gone forever. "Oh my God," I whispered. "Is this the same exact thing happening to Mrs. Crenshaw?" Different specific details, but the exact same pattern. Vulnerable elderly person, usually someone who's been widowed, targeted by someone claiming to be family or connected to family. The pregnancy angle is perfect because it creates emotional urgency and gets people to invest their hearts completely. I felt sick to my stomach thinking about Mrs. Crenshaw next door, probably still sitting at her kitchen table with those fake ultrasound pictures, trying to make sense of how her own daughter could betray her so completely. But Jasper, this is supposed to be her actual daughter, not some stranger pretending to be related. "Is it, though?" He leaned back in his chair, looking exhausted. When was the last time Mrs. Crenshaw actually saw Melody in person? Before this month, I mean. I tried to remember, digging through months of casual conversations. Mrs. Crenshaw talked about Melody constantly, but always in the context of phone calls, letters, emails, and text messages. I don't think Melody has visited here since we've been living in this duplex. That's 2 whole years. Exactly right. And what about before that? I thought harder, remembering conversations we'd had with Mrs. Crenshaw about family relationships and holidays. She mentioned once that they'd grown apart after Melody moved to Oregon for work. Something about Melody being really busy with her new job and her marriage. Very convenient excuse for avoiding in-person visits. Jasper pulled out another printed page from his research pile. I did some more digging into Mrs. Crenshaw's family background. Her husband died 5 years ago from cancer. Her real daughter, Melody, died in a car accident 3 years ago. The words hit me like a physical slap across the face. "What did you just say?" "Obituary from the Portland Tribune newspaper. Melody Elizabeth Crenshaw, age 32, killed in a multi-car accident on Interstate 84 during bad weather. Survived by her mother, Dorothy Crenshaw of Ohio." I stared at the printout he handed me, reading the brief death notice over and over until the words stopped making sense. There was even a small photo of a young woman with Mrs. Crenshaw's eyes and gentle smile. "So who," I said slowly, my voice barely working, "has been pretending to be her dead daughter? Someone who knew enough about the real Melody to be convincing. Someone who knew that Mrs. Crenshaw was lonely and grieving. Someone who could exploit her desperate desire to believe her daughter was still alive and wanted a relationship with her. The cruelty of it took my breath away completely. Not only was someone stealing Mrs. Crenshaw's money systematically, they were giving her false hope about a daughter who was already dead, about a grandchild who could never ever exist. How long do you think this has been going on?" Jasper consulted his timeline notes carefully. Based on everything Mrs. Crenshaw has told us over the months, the contact from Melody started about 18 months ago. First, just Christmas cards and letters. Then phone calls became regular. Then the pregnancy announcement came at Christmas time. Right after the 2-year anniversary of real Melody's death, the pattern was becoming sickeningly clear to me. When Mrs. Crenshaw would have been at her lowest point emotionally, missing her daughter the most. The timing definitely isn't coincidental. Jasper closed his laptop with a snap. Someone specifically targeted her when she was most vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. I thought about Mrs. Crenshaw's face yesterday at the baby shower. The pure joy radiating from her as she watched Melody open gifts. The way she'd talked for months about knitting booties and setting up the nursery, making plans for trips to Oregon to help with the baby. "We have to tell her the truth," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell her what exactly?" that her daughter has been dead for 3 years and someone has been impersonating her to steal money. That the pregnancy she's been excited about for months is not only fake, but the person she thinks is her daughter is actually a complete stranger who's been manipulating her grief. Put that way, it sounded impossibly cruel to deliver such news. But the alternative was letting the scam continue until Mrs. Crenshaw lost everything. She already knows something is very wrong, I pointed out. She found those fake ultrasound pictures herself. She knows she's been lied to about the pregnancy, but she doesn't know the real extent of it. Right now, she probably thinks her daughter just lied about being pregnant, maybe because of financial problems or relationship troubles. She has no idea that her daughter is actually dead. We sat in heavy silence for a moment, both completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we'd uncovered. "There's something else," Jasper said quietly. "Something that makes this situation even more urgent and dangerous." I wasn't sure I could handle learning anything worse, but I nodded for him to continue. "I found some recent real estate records while I was researching. Mrs. Crenshaw put this duplex on the market last week." "On the market?" I felt the blood drain from my face like water down a bathtub drain. "But she never said anything to us about selling. We're her tenants." "Shouldn't she have told us?" Jasper showed me the real estate listing on his laptop screen. There it was in black and white. Our duplex, listed for $340,000. With professional photos and a description highlighting the investment potential and motivated seller status. "The listing went live last Friday," he said. 5 days ago, before the baby shower. The timeline was starting to make horrible perfect sense. So the shower wasn't just a celebration, it was a deadline. Get Mrs. Crenshaw emotionally invested in her fake grandchild right before she makes the biggest financial decision of her entire life. Jasper's voice was grim as winter. "Think about it carefully. She's planning to sell her home to move closer to her grandchild. Once that money changes hands, it'll be gone forever." I finished his thought, feeling sick to my stomach. Along with her home, her security, everything she has left in the world. The real estate listing showed that there was already a showing scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. In less than 24 hours, potential buyers would be walking through our home, and Mrs. Crenshaw would be one giant step closer to losing absolutely everything. "We have to stop this," I said, standing up so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Right now, we have to tell her everything we know." "Iris, wait!" Jasper caught my arm before I could storm out the door. "Think about this for a minute. If we tell her that her daughter has been dead for 3 years, and the past 18 months of contact have been completely fake, it might destroy her completely. And if we don't tell her, she'll lose her home and life savings to a criminal." We stared at each other across the kitchen, both understanding the impossible position we were stuck in. How do you tell someone that their worst nightmare, their child's death, is actually true, while simultaneously revealing that someone has been exploiting their grief for over a year? "Maybe there's another way," I said slowly, an idea forming in my mind. "What if we can prove the person claiming to be Melody is a fraud without having to tell Mrs. Crenshaw about the real Melody's death? How would we do that?" I was already moving toward the door. "By catching them in the act. The fake Melody left this morning, but scammers don't usually abandon a mark when they're this close to a huge payoff. She'll be back. You think she'll come back for the house sale? I think she'll come back for whatever she can get. And when she does, we'll be ready with proof." We spent the next hour planning our approach like we were preparing for battle. Jasper would continue monitoring online activity, the real estate listing, any new attempts to contact Mrs. Crenshaw through email or social media. I would keep watch on the house and try to stay close to Mrs. Crenshaw without being obvious about it. "What if we're wrong about all of this?" Jasper asked as we finished our planning. "What if there's some explanation we haven't considered?" "Then we apologize and look foolish," I said. "But if we're right and we do nothing, Mrs. Crenshaw loses everything that matters to her." As evening approached, I found an excuse to go outside and water our herb garden, positioning myself where I could see both our driveway and Mrs. Crenshaw's front door. The house had been quiet all afternoon, but around 6 o'clock, I noticed lights turning on in different rooms, as if someone was moving around inside. My phone buzzed with a text message, "I'm here." I looked around confused, then noticed a car parked across the street that hadn't been there before. A dark sedan, the same one I'd seen leaving in the middle of the night. My heart started racing like I'd been running upstairs. Fake Melody was back. I quickly texted Jasper. "She's here, car across the street." His response was immediate. "Do not approach alone. Wait for me." But as I watched, the front door of Mrs. Crenshaw's house opened, and the woman we'd known as Melody stepped out. Even from a distance, I could see she looked different, less pregnant, her movements quicker and more confident. She was carrying a large suitcase. She was leaving again. And if she left now, with the house showing scheduled for tomorrow, Mrs. Crenshaw might complete the sale before we could prove anything. I made a decision that would change everything. "Melody," I called out, walking across the yard toward Mrs. Crenshaw's driveway. She froze like a deer in headlights, the suitcase halfway to her car. Up close, I could see that her pregnancy looked noticeably deflated, like a balloon that had been losing air all day. "Oh, hi, Iris," she said, but her voice was strained and nervous. I need to head back to Oregon tonight. Last-minute flight change." "That's very sudden," I said, trying to keep my voice casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Is everything okay with the baby?" Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, but the gesture looked completely wrong now that I knew what to look for. The bump was definitely smaller, and it shifted in a way that real pregnant bellies never do. "Just some complications. The doctor wants to see me right away." "Which doctor?" I asked, in case your mom needs to call about anything. The question caught her completely off guard. She blinked several times, clearly trying to think of an answer that would sound believable. "Dr. Miller," she said finally. "Dr. Sarah Miller." I nodded as if that made perfect sense, but stored the obviously made-up name in my memory. "Well, I hope everything works out," I said. "Your mom is so excited about being a grandmother. This pregnancy has given her so much joy over the past few months." Something flickered across her face, guilt, maybe, or discomfort. For just a moment, she looked almost human instead of like a predator hunting prey. "Yes," she said quietly. "I know she's been happy." "It's funny," I continued, taking a big risk. "I was just thinking earlier about how much you look like your mom, especially around the eyes. She must have been really beautiful when she was younger." The woman's expression hardened like concrete. "I really need to go. My flight." "Of course. But before you leave, I'm curious about something." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "How long did you think you could keep this up?" She went very still, like a wild animal sensing danger. "Keep what up?" "The pregnancy, the fake ultrasounds, the whole elaborate performance." For a moment, neither of us moved. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of Jasper's car pulling into our driveway. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice shook like leaves in the wind. "Really?" "Because I know about the websites where you bought those ultrasound images. I know about the fake pregnancy belly you're wearing. And I know about the real Melody." The last words hit her like a physical blow. Her face went white as paper, and the suitcase slipped from her grip, hitting the pavement with a loud thud. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who cares about Mrs. Crenshaw. Someone who isn't going to let you destroy her life." Behind me, I heard car doors slamming as Jasper arrived, hopefully with some kind of backup plan. "You don't understand," the fake Melody said desperately. "It's not what you think. I never meant for it to go this far." "Then explain it to me," I said. "Explain how you justify impersonating a dead woman to steal from her grieving mother." She flinched at the word dead, confirming that she knew the truth about the real Melody. "I needed the money," she said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "I was desperate, but I wasn't going to take the house money. I swear I wasn't. I was going to disappear before it got that far." "Before what got that far?" "Before you completely destroyed an innocent old woman's life?" Before I had to see her face when she realized what I'd done. She was crying openly now. Before I had to watch her heart break into a million pieces. "My name is Angela," she said, slumping against her car as if the weight of maintaining her false identity had finally become too much to bear. "Angela Torres. And before you ask, yes, I knew Melody, the real Melody." Jasper had reached us now, slightly out of breath from running across the yard. I could see he had his phone in his hand, ready to call police if the situation got dangerous. "How did you know her?" I asked. Angela wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied makeup like paint in the rain. "We worked together," At a dental office in Portland, I was the receptionist. She was a hygienist. We were friends, good friends. Actually, the pieces were starting to come together in my mind, but the picture they formed was still missing crucial parts. So when she died, I was completely devastated. Angela's voice cracked like broken glass. She was one of the few people who was kind to me when I moved to Oregon with nothing. No family, barely any money, working 2 jobs just to afford a tiny studio apartment in the worst part of town. I glanced at Jasper, seeing my own confusion reflected in his expression. This wasn't the story of a heartless criminal we'd expected to hear. After the funeral, I was cleaning out her desk at work. Her supervisor asked me to box up her personal things for her family. That's when I found the letters. What letters? From Mrs. Crenshaw. Melody kept every single one her mother sent her over the years. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, just random notes about her life and the weather. Angela's tears were flowing freely now. But here's the thing, Melody never responded to any of them. I felt a chill run down my spine like ice water. What do you mean? They hadn't spoken in over 2 years before Melody died. They'd had some kind of terrible fight. Melody never told me the exact details, but she was bitter and angry about it. She'd get these loving letters from her mother and just throw them away after reading them. The revelation was staggering. All this time, I'd assumed Mrs. Crenshaw and her daughter had maintained some kind of relationship, even if it was distant. But if they'd been completely estranged, Mrs. Crenshaw doesn't know they weren't speaking, Jasper said, understanding immediately. She has no idea at all. She kept writing letters, kept sending cards and little gifts, kept hoping Melody would reach out and forgive her. After the funeral, I couldn't stop thinking about this sweet old lady who was probably waiting for a phone call that would never, ever come. Angela reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope. The return address clearly visible, Dorothy Crenshaw, followed by our street address. This came to the office 3 months after Melody died, addressed to her. A birthday card with a $50 check inside and a note saying how much she missed her daughter and hoped they could work things out soon. I could picture Mrs. Crenshaw writing that card, probably sitting at her kitchen table, agonizing over every word, hoping this would be the gesture that brought her daughter back into her life. So you decided to answer it, I said. Not right away. I kept the card for weeks, trying to decide what to do. I knew I should probably call Mrs. Crenshaw and tell her about Melody's death. But I also knew it would completely destroy her, and I was dealing with my own serious problems. What kind of problems? Angela looked embarrassed and scared. My ex-boyfriend, he'd been abusive for months, and when I finally got the courage to leave him, he started stalking me everywhere I went. I had to quit my job, move apartments 3 times, change my phone number. I was running out of money fast, and he kept finding me no matter where I went. The story was becoming more complicated by the minute. Not a simple case of a predator targeting a vulnerable elderly person, but a desperate woman making increasingly bad decisions. I wrote 1 letter back, Angela continued, just to let her know that Melody was thinking of her. I was going to tell her that Melody had gotten married and was happy, and then gradually let the contact fade away. I thought it would give her some peace, but it didn't fade away. Mrs. Crenshaw was so incredibly happy to hear from her daughter. She wrote back immediately, this long letter, full of love and hope and plans for the future. She sent pictures of the house, talked about maybe visiting Oregon, asked a million questions about my new husband and my life. I could see how the lie had snowballed out of control. One small deception to spare an old woman's feelings had grown into an elaborate fiction. The money started really small, Angela said. She'd send $20 here and there, just little gifts to help out. And I was so broke, and my ex was still threatening me. And I told myself I'd pay her back once I got back on my feet. But it got bigger and bigger. Much bigger. Especially after I told her about the pregnancy. Angela's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I was getting desperate. My ex had found my new apartment. I'd lost another job because of his harassment. And I was facing homelessness. The pregnancy lie was supposed to be temporary, just to explain why I couldn't visit for a while. How long have you been doing this? Jasper asked. 18 months total. And every single day, it got harder to maintain. Every letter from Mrs. Crenshaw, every phone call, Every time she talked about how excited she was to be a grandmother, Angela broke down completely. I kept telling myself I'd find a way out, that I'd disappear before she got too invested. But she was so happy, and I was so scared, and the money kept coming. I thought about Mrs. Crenshaw's face at the baby shower, the pure joy she'd radiated while opening gifts for a grandchild who didn't exist. The house, I said. She's selling the house to move to Oregon. I know. Angela's voice was filled with anguish. That's exactly why I was trying to leave tonight. When she told me about listing the property, I realized how far this had gone. I can't let her sell her home for a lie. But you were going to disappear with all the money she's already sent. Angela looked deeply ashamed. I was going to leave her a long note explaining everything, about the pregnancy being fake, about needing the money for emergencies. I was going to make it sound like Melody had gotten into financial trouble and was too embarrassed to tell the truth, without telling her that Melody is dead. I couldn't. I just couldn't be the one to tell her that her daughter died 3 years ago while they were fighting. Can you imagine living with that guilt, knowing that your last conversation with your child was angry, and you never got the chance to make it right? The ethical complexity of the situation was overwhelming. Angela had committed fraud, stolen thousands of dollars, and put Mrs. Crenshaw through emotional manipulation. But she'd also been trying, in her twisted way, to protect a grieving mother from an even more devastating truth. What was the fight about? I asked. Between Mrs. Crenshaw and the real Melody. Angela hesitated for a moment. Melody's father, when he was dying of cancer, Melody wanted him to try an experimental treatment that Mrs. Crenshaw thought was too risky and expensive. They argued about it for months. After he died, Melody blamed her mother for not fighting harder to save him. Another layer of tragedy. Mrs. Crenshaw had been dealing not just with her husband's death, but with her daughter's anger and blame. No wonder she'd been so desperate to believe that Melody had forgiven her and wanted a relationship again. Angela, I said carefully, Mrs. Crenshaw already knows something is wrong. She found out the ultrasound pictures were fake. Angela's face went completely white. She knows? She confronted me about it this afternoon. She's heartbroken and confused, but she doesn't know the full truth yet. What are you going to do? Angela asked, and I could hear the terror in her voice. I looked at Jasper, then back at Angela. That depends on what you do next. I want to make this right, Angela said, her voice barely audible over the evening breeze. But I don't know how. If I tell her the truth about Melody being dead, it will destroy her completely. If I don't, she'll lose her house and never trust anyone again. The three of us stood in Mrs. Crenshaw's driveway as the sun began to set behind the trees, each lost in the impossibility of the situation. Through the windows, I could see Mrs. Crenshaw moving around inside, probably preparing dinner for one, probably wondering where her daughter had gone. There's something else you need to know, I said to Angela. Mrs. Crenshaw has been talking about you, about Melody, constantly for months, to us, to her neighbors, to anyone who would listen. You've given her purpose again, hope. You've made her feel like she matters to someone. Angela closed her eyes as if my words caused physical pain. I know, that's what makes this so horrible, but it's also what makes this fixable, Jasper said suddenly. Both Angela and I turned to look at him with surprise. What do you mean? I asked. Mrs. Crenshaw's real problem isn't the money. She's financially stable enough to recover from that loss. Her real problem is loneliness and guilt. She's been carrying the burden of her fight with Melody for years, probably blaming herself for her daughter's death, even though she doesn't know it happened. I began to see where he was going with this idea. You think we should tell her the truth? All of it. Melody's death, the years of estrangement, and why Angela did what she did. Angela looked terrified. She'll hate me forever. She'll call the police. Maybe, Jasper said, honestly. Or maybe she'll understand that you were trying to give her something she desperately needed, forgiveness from her daughter and a chance to feel important to someone again. It was a huge risk. Mrs. Crenshaw could react with fury, devastation, or complete emotional collapse. But the alternative was allowing her to continue living a lie or discovering the truth in an even more painful way. I'll go with you, I said to Angela. We'll tell her together. What if she can't handle hearing it? Then we'll help her handle it. But she deserves to know the truth about her daughter's death. And she deserves to grieve properly instead of carrying guilt about a fight that might have been resolved if Melody had lived longer. Angela was quiet for a long time, staring at Mrs. Crenshaw's front door like it was the entrance to a courtroom. Finally, she nodded slowly. Okay, but I want to return the money first. All of it. I have most of it saved. I was too guilty to spend much of it on myself. That's a good start, Jasper said. We agreed that Angela would call Mrs. Crenshaw and ask to come inside for an important conversation. Jasper would wait at our house in case we needed backup or support. I would go with Angela to provide moral support and to help explain our involvement in discovering the truth. 20 minutes later, the three of us sat in Mrs. Crenshaw's living room. She'd served tea and cookies as if this were a normal social visit, but I could see the tension in her posture, the careful way she watched Angela's every movement. You look different tonight, dear, Mrs. Crenshaw said to Angela. Less rounded. Angela's hand moved to her deflated fake belly. That's part of what I need to tell you. For the next hour, Angela told Mrs. Crenshaw everything. The real Melody's death in the car accident, the letters she'd found at work, her own desperate circumstances with the abusive ex-boyfriend, the escalating lies about the pregnancy. She explained about the estrangement between mother and daughter, about Melody's anger over her father's treatment, about how the real Melody had died without the two of them making peace. Mrs. Crenshaw listened in complete silence, her face cycling through expressions of shock, grief, anger, and something that looked almost like relief. When Angela finished speaking, the room was quiet except for the tick of the wall clock. So my daughter has been dead for 3 years, Mrs. Crenshaw said finally. Yes, and she died still angry with me. Angela hesitated. She died hurt. But Mrs. Crenshaw, she kept every letter you sent her. Every single one. She might not have been ready to respond, but she kept them all. That has to mean something. Mrs. Crenshaw was quiet for another long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but full of deep pain. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not the money, though that stings badly. It's not even the lies about the pregnancy, though that breaks my heart. She looked directly at Angela. The worst part is that for 18 months, I felt like I had my daughter back. I felt forgiven. I felt loved. And now I have to grieve, losing her all over again. Angela began to cry again. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far. And now I need to decide what to do about it. My heart raced. This was the moment when Mrs. Crenshaw would either call the police or find some way to move forward. I could prosecute you, she continued. Wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. I imagine there are several serious charges that would apply.
Yes, ma'am.
Or, Mrs. Crenshaw said, you could help me do something that might honor my daughter's memory. Angela looked up with surprise. What do you mean? You said you were desperate when this started. Running from an abusive ex-boyfriend, homeless, scared. Is that still true? Not the homeless part anymore. But yes, I'm still struggling. Mrs. Crenshaw stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the darkening street. I'm a 72-year-old woman living alone in a house too big for me. I've been thinking about downsizing for years. But I couldn't bear the thought of being completely alone. She turned back to face us. What if we made a deal? What kind of deal? You get professional help, therapy to deal with whatever drove you to make these choices. You get job training or education to build a better life for yourself. And in exchange, you help me. Not as my fake daughter, but as someone who understands loss and desperation. I stared at Mrs. Crenshaw, amazed by her capacity for forgiveness, and her wisdom in seeing past Angela's deception to the pain underneath. You would trust me after what I've done? Trust has to be earned back, Mrs. Crenshaw said. But everyone deserves a second chance, even people who make terrible choices when they're scared. Angela looked overwhelmed. What about the house? The real estate listing? Mrs. Crenshaw smiled sadly. I think I'll take it off the market. It turns out I don't need to move to Oregon after all. 6 months later, I watched from our kitchen window as Mrs. Crenshaw and Angela worked together in the garden, planting bulbs for next spring's flowers. The transformation in both women was remarkable and beautiful to see. Angela had kept every single word of her promise. She'd returned every penny she could manage, found a legitimate job as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic downtown, and started therapy twice a week to address the trauma that had led to her desperate choices. She'd also helped Miss Crenshaw take down the real estate listing and begun renting the small apartment above Mrs. Crenshaw's garage, an arrangement that helped them both financially and emotionally. Mrs. Crenshaw had grieved properly for her real daughter, finally able to process Melody's death and the guilt she'd carried about their terrible fight. With Angela's help, she'd even reached out to some of Melody's former coworkers and friends in Oregon, learning more about her daughter's life there, and finding some peace in discovering that Melody had spoken fondly of her mother despite their argument. "They look genuinely happy," Jasper said, joining me at the window with his morning coffee. "They do. It's strange how something so wrong ended up creating something so right." The doorbell rang, interrupting our quiet observation. Mrs. Crenshaw stood on our doorstep, holding a covered dish that smelled like her famous apple crisp with cinnamon. "I wanted to thank you both again," she said as we invited her into our living room. "I know this whole situation put you in an impossible position. We're just glad everything worked out so well," I said, accepting the warm dessert gratefully. "It's more than just worked out. Angela told me yesterday that she's saved enough money to start taking college classes in the fall. Business administration. She wants to open her own pet grooming business someday." The pride in Mrs. Crenshaw's voice was unmistakable. She'd become something like a mentor to Angela, or perhaps a grandmother figure, filling a void that the fake pregnancy had only temporarily addressed. "And how are you doing?" Jasper asked. "Really and truly." Mrs. Crenshaw considered the question carefully, like she always did with important things. "I'm sad that I'll never get to reconcile with Melody in person. That pain will probably never go away completely. But I'm grateful that I finally know the truth about what happened to her. And I'm grateful that her death, tragic as it was, somehow brought Angela into my life. It wasn't the ending any of us had expected when this all began, with a dramatic exit from a baby shower. But it was perhaps the most honest and healing one possible." "There's something else," Mrs. Crenshaw said, her eyes twinkling with familiar mischief. "Angela and I are planning to take a trip to Oregon next month, to visit Melody's grave, but also to meet some of her friends and coworkers. People who knew the real Melody and can tell me stories about her actual life there." "That sounds wonderful and healing," I said, meaning it completely. "Angela's been so helpful in planning the whole thing. She knows the city well, knows some of the people Melody worked with. It feels like the right way to honor my daughter's memory. Not with fake ultrasounds and imaginary grandchildren, but with real connections to the life she actually lived." After Mrs. Crenshaw left, Jasper and I sat on our couch, sharing the apple crisp and reflecting on everything that had happened. "Do you think we did the right thing?" I asked, pushing for the truth instead of just calling the police when we first figured out the scam. "I think we did the only thing we could live with," Jasper replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes the truth is more complicated than just right and wrong." I thought about the baby shower that had started all of this. The pink balloons, the gift-wrapped presents, Mrs. Crenshaw's glowing face as she anticipated becoming a grandmother. That happiness had been built on a lie, but it had also filled a real need in her life for connection and purpose. Angela's deception had been wrong, but it had grown out of desperation and eventually genuine care for the woman she was deceiving. "At least something beautiful came out of it," I said. "Two things, actually," Jasper smiled. "Mrs. Crenshaw isn't alone anymore, and Angela got a second chance to build a better life." Through our window, I could see the two women finishing their gardening, Angela helping Mrs. Crenshaw to her feet, and both of them laughing about something. Tomorrow, they would probably have coffee together and continue planning their Oregon trip. Next week, Angela would start her college classes while Mrs. Crenshaw cheered her on. It wasn't the family either of them had originally hoped for, but it was real and honest. And after months of elaborate deceptions and painful revelations, real was exactly what they both needed most. The fake pregnancy had ended, but something genuine and lasting had begun. Sometimes, I realized, the most unexpected disasters can become the foundation for the most meaningful connections, as long as people are brave enough to face the truth together and choose forgiveness over revenge. And that's how a fake pregnancy at a baby shower taught me that sometimes the most broken people create the most beautiful second chances. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Stories like this remind us that kindness can come from the most unexpected places. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button to help spread more stories of hope and forgiveness. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share real stories about real people finding light in dark moments. Speaking of inspiring stories, click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another tale that will restore your faith in human nature. Thanks for listening, and remember, everyone deserves a second chance.